Ashraf Ghani is Afghanistan's second president since the fall of the Taliban in 2001. He faces Islamic terrorist threats, a severe budget shortfall, and rampant public corruption. The election that took place in June was marred by allegations of fraud, but last month, the Western-educated Ghani was declared the winner. However, he had to make a power-sharing deal with the second-place finisher, Abdullah Abdullah. He has been named the Chief Executive Officer of Afghanistan, a role similar to that of a Prime Minister. Afghanistan also has signed now a security agreement with the United States that will allow US troops to stay in the war-torn nation until the end of 2016. What does this agreement mean for US-Afghan relations, and what will the new government be able to achieve going forward? To answer those questions, I'm joined by former Afghan Ambassador to France and Canada, Omar Samad. Thanks so much for joining us, Omar. First of all, who are these two men? What are their personalities like?
Well, I would describe Ashraf Ghani as a gentleman, scholar / technocrat. And I would describe Dr. Abdullah as a gentleman, diplomat / someone who stuck it out throughout 30 years of Afghanistan's conflict. They are probably some of the best that Afghanistan could offer at the moment. The good thing is that they came together and joined in a team. The hope is that this team will consolidate and this team will do what the Afghans expect them to do because the country faces so many problems. They both are educated, they are moderate in their viewpoints, their ideology, if you would. They have experience both in government and outside government, and they're seasoned politicians.
So why so much rivalry if they're both moderates, they both have similar backgrounds?
Yes, rivalries because they have different support systems. They come from different bases. They have obviously both to some extent enjoyed working in government. I think Ashraf Ghani has spent a lot of time on the outside, but over the last 13 years, he has tried to reconnect with the Afghan people. And Abdullah has had the experience throughout the last 35 years or so of Afghanistan's tumultuous history.
You worked for Abdullah Abdullah when he was foreign minister. Can you see both these gentlemen getting on, actually working towards what needs to be done in Afghanistan, or do you see them trying to carve out competing territories?
I think the two individuals can and probably will give it their best to work together. What may become a problem over time is if they surround themselves with the wrong individuals, if they have a team that their teams do not see eye to eye, or they start competing or undermining each other. I think that they have to be very careful in selecting their immediate colleagues. And then, of course, in the next few weeks, they have to select the new Afghan government, the new cabinet, and the high positions that have to be filled. And this will be the first test. The first test is, will they be able to create a team that can work? It doesn't mean that everybody has to think alike. It means that they have to be able to work together for a program and a strategy that is sort of shared by the two individuals.
There has been rampant corruption during the Karzai administration. Do you see that changing under these two men?
There are already signs that Mr. Ghani and Dr. Abdullah are both have the will to tackle corruption. Dr. Ghani, President Ghani now has asked that the country's justice system pursue the Kabul bank, the $1 billion sort of fraudulent bank fraud that took place a few years ago, that the case be reopened, which is a very controversial issue. And the test now is to see how far this investigation is going to go and how deep it is going to be, and whether it's going to tackle the problem across the board, or is it going to be politicized? If it is politicized, then there will be questions asked. But if he's able to deal with it efficiently and justly, then I think people will realize that there is political will to combat corruption in Afghanistan.
What about voter fraud? Because a lot of Afghans were worried about corruption within the electoral process. So it took months behind the scenes to work out a formula acceptable to both candidates. How does the ordinary Afghan feel about this process that has led to the choice that they had, basically these two men sharing power?
Electoral fraud obviously has deepened sort of fault lines in Afghanistan and rifts. And there are probably half of the population that feels that their vote didn't count and the other half that feels that it did. So I think that one of the first priorities for these two new leaders is to heal the wounds of electoral fraud and make sure that the country can now work on reforming the electoral system and do it in a manner that is acceptable to all and not just one or two parties in Afghanistan. I think that this issue of electoral fraud, one day people will know what the realities are and what maybe have happened, but regardless, it has to be put behind us at this point, and realizing that yes, fraud did take place, that these two gentlemen finally came together for the sake of Afghanistan and making sure that it does not happen again.
This deal between the two men was brokered largely by the United States with the backing of the United Nations. Then, as soon as it was solved, the US got this security agreement that has been long after, which will keep US troops in Afghanistan till probably around 2016, around 10,000, drawing them down. Is this vital for stability of Afghanistan going forward?
Afghans overwhelmingly think it is vital. Why? Because they don't think that the job of bringing the Taliban to the negotiating table has worked yet, and that the job is not done yet. They don't think that the insurgency has been weakened enough. They don't think that the Afghan national security forces, the army and the police are strong enough and equipped enough. So if you put all of these things together, Afghans feel that the international community needs to be on their side for a few more years, yes, and progressively wind down this mission and hope that the situation will be under control by 2016 or 17.
But if we look at Iraq, for example, that hasn't happened. Are Afghans worried that the Taliban could become resurgent?
Well, we averted in Iraq situation, because if you remember, the Iraqis did not sign on to a SOFA or security agreement with the United States, and now we are seeing some repercussions. Afghanistan hopefully will be able to avoid such a dilemma, and that the Afghan forces themselves will be able to be in full charge of security in the country in the next few years.
But the Americans have a pretty quick drawdown timetable, only leaving a few thousand troops towards the end of that. And countries, neighboring countries, even as different as Pakistan and India, have said maybe security force needs to be there longer. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that this is the only worry that we have, is that it's better not to give a timetable to the other side. It's better to leave it sort of open, but with the idea that at some point it's going to end. I think that Afghans would like to say, well, let's look at the situation on the ground in 2016. If there's a need for a few more years of assistance, then let's reconsider it. If there is no need, then let's end it gradually. As far as the neighbors are concerned, I think that everyone realizes that we live in a very, let's say, dangerous and very dynamic part of the world. The geography says it and shows it. I think that there are some countries that feel somewhat uneasy about the situation and others who are more comfortable with it. But one thing, the Afghans have been very clear: whatever happens in Afghanistan should not be seen as a threat to anybody else. It is all for the purpose of stabilizing Afghanistan and making sure that Afghanistan eventually has the kind of peace that it deserves.
Thank you very much. That's former Afghan Ambassador to France and Canada, Omar Samad, joining us. Time now for a quick break. When we come back, we will talk to a US foreign policy expert about the new security agreement with Afghanistan and what it means for both nations.